Okay, right, let's get started. So welcome everyone to Homstock Oxford University Hindu Society's 6-week talk called Lessons from the Gita, How Can We Change the Way We Live? And so this is by our very own events officer, Arjun, over here.
Right.
He's talking about his personal experience with the Gita, what it's taught him, and how his teachings can help improve your life. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Arjun.
Thank you very much, Shanu. So just let's start sharing my screen. So welcome everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about lessons from the Gita from my perspective. So I mean, this is by no means a comprehensive list of all the philosophies the Gita can teach us, but this is something that I like to try and practice myself from what I learned reading this book several years ago. And so I thought it'd be something I'd really like to do to share with you all. So let's just start off by talking about the backdrop of this story. So the Gita is actually a very short section of one of the epics called the Mahabharata, where my namesake and pronounced in Sanskrit Arjun is coming up against his own extended family, his cousins, from his uncle. And these people are, unjust, greedy, horrible. They've stolen the share of Arjun's side of the family's part of the kingdom. And now it's up to Arjun and his family to fight for, what is right and what is theirs. And Arjun is the head of his army. But Arjun is afraid that what he's doing is unjust. It's not right. Imagine facing your cousins and extended family and almost trying to prepare yourself to kill them. That's really what was going on here. And his charioteer Krishna, which I'm sure all of you have heard of, his charioteer tells him, Arjun, you must fight. You can't back down. You must do what is right. And the whole of the message of the Gita and the story is Krishna giving Arjun this full discourse on life. It's not necessarily just talking about the battle itself. Of course, Krishna gives him advice on that, but it goes much, much deeper than that. And Krishna reveals himself as God to Arjun, and Arjun and Krishna are supposedly friends. So Arjun feels terrible that he's treated him flippantly in the past, and it's almost like a holy revelation for Arjun when Krishna reveals all these truths. So let's just talk about what the Gita is really getting at in terms of these truths. So the way it does it is categorizes it into 3 types of yoga. So yoga can be thought of as a type of spiritual practice. Of course, in the West, we see yoga as, the physical contortions, moving in weird positions, and that's called Hatha yoga. And the way you can kind of link it to the yogas I'm about to explain is using this concept of mind control, because all these strange positions often are quite difficult to hold. And what it really requires you to do is not necessarily have to be flexible and all those, be strong kind of thing. It's rather mentally strong to be able to focus and hold that position without wavering. So Hatha yoga can be considered as almost like a prerequisite of mind control before you start to walk the path of Jnana yoga. And as you can see here, Jnana yoga is known as spiritual knowledge. So that's kind of, understanding these truths that, Krishna tells Arjun, as I'll explain in the talk. And this is almost the most elevated form of yoga. And karma yoga is known as I'm sure many of you would have heard of karma before. It's known as action. Every action has a consequence kind of thing. In terms of karma yoga, we're thinking about service to others, helping people, and being selfless. And the most, not necessarily the simplest, but the lowest almost form of yoga is known as Bhakti Yoga, which is pure devotion to God. So prayer, faith, that kind of thing. So let's start by kind of decomposing 4 truths from these 3 types of yoga that really struck me when I first read this book. So I mean, just a bit of background of, for those that don't know me, I'm not a philosophical person in particular. I study engineering. So, you wouldn't expect that, I didn't expect that I would get so interested in this and start to understand this more deeply as I grew older. But I read this book. Actually, it was a children's version of this book I read that my dad gave to me almost 3 or 4 years ago now. And, I'm not particularly a big reader or anything. And so I didn't expect to be so enlightened almost by it. But some of the things that, you read in these things, it also depends on the attitude you take towards it. So, you can almost, a lot of these things you'll think potentially can be thought of as cliche that I'm about to explain, or it's easy to say, difficult to do. But when you really understand the context of these truths from a broader perspective, like thinking about your role in this world, it really gets you thinking about how you can implement these things to actually change your life for the better. So let's start with Bhakti Yoga. So let's think about faith in God. So in the Gita, Krishna tells us that any forms of these yogas, any of the three yogas, are equally valid ways of us reaching him effectively. The ultimate goal is for us to reach God, reach Krishna. And this can be done using yoga, controlling your mind, helping others, being selfless, and always being devoted to God. But it's important to note that Krishna does highlight that Jnana Yoga is considered the most effective and powerful method to reach him, although it's worth noting that this is unbelievably difficult. Jnana Yoga requires exceptional focus and deep understanding of the philosophies. But let's stick to Bhakti for now. So, we see, not necessarily in Hinduism, in all cultures, it's very common for those who believe in God to, if you're in a difficult situation or something's gone wrong, you're sad, it's very natural and a lovely thing to, go to God and pray and try to find peace, try to find motivation and help. And the Gita tells us, Krishna tells us that this prayer and devotion is welcomed at any time. There's never going to be a time that Krishna says, you've done something wrong, I don't love you anymore, I'm not going to help you, you can't come to me. This is not the case. Krishna is trying to tell us that God is someone you should never think of as having bad intentions towards you. Obviously, God is a strange concept, but if you think of it as some transcendent concept, Krishna always wants to love us. Okay, God is always there for us. But his true devotees are those who can have faith in him regardless of whatever they're going through. So, suppose you're really happy, something great has happened. Krishna would hope that you still, regardless of whatever happened, in this case it was happy, he would hope that Krishna would hope that you have faith in him regardless of whether you're happy, you're sad, you're not particularly happy or sad. The point is, Krishna tells us that to truly have faith in God and practice Bhakti Yoga, you must really have faith in God all the time because you love God, not because God is some kind of vehicle for you to kind of achieve results. Almost like you pray to God, I want this to happen, I want that to happen. When you start treating God like that, it almost loses the meaning of faith. Faith, God should be something personal to you because you love God, and the concept that some transcendent being is almost looking out for you is a beautiful concept. It shouldn't be something that's abused. So Krishna tells us that we shouldn't let external conditions affect the way we have faith and our devotion to him. If something bad happens, we shouldn't say, oh, I don't care about God anymore. That's not true faith in God. So that's one thing I learned on the Bhakti side that I thought was, really powerful, because it's almost like, it's not genuine faith if we're just going to God in hard times, or like we thank God if something good happened to us. That's, for me personally, that's not true faith. So let's now move on to a karma concept, which is, to respect everyone and love everyone. So, in our society, there's always this culture of being popular, to be the coolest person around. We all do it. I'm guilty of it too. But I mean, we can often sometimes be disrespectful, hurtful, rude. Well, of course, we might not necessarily have bad intentions, or we're not trying to be malicious, but we don't understand or empathize with the person or people we're talking to in this bad way. And not understanding that is very bad for them, because you've upset them, and it's not very fulfilling for you. So I think it's important we think carefully about how other people are going through their daily life, what they might be experiencing, and ultimately just be helpful, supportive, and loving to everyone, regardless of their situation. So don't be, not to be judgmental, to be respectful. And the crux of this whole thing for me is to not expect anything in return when giving this support and help. Because I feel like a lot of the times we see around us that, let's say someone opens a library, they donate a lot of money to open a library. So yes, they may have good intentions towards the people that are going to use that library, but they also might add the condition to the builders that, okay, I want my name on here, and that kind of ruins the whole purpose of this donation to help people, because it's almost a personal gain. And when that starts to get problematic is when things like that don't happen. If something doesn't go your way when you help someone, so when you expect a favor back and they don't, you feel terrible, you feel ashamed, you feel like you did something wrong. So I think if we remove this expectation of favors when we help people and love people and support people, you become almost free of worrying about these things. You're less vulnerable to being disappointed. You don't become selfish, because when you expect things back, you're hoping that something can benefit you because you help someone. You don't feel isolated anymore because you're happy to help anyone. It's not about close friend, family. You're just just a very helpful person. And obviously that's in a very extreme case. It's difficult to implement in the in real life, but if you can get close to that, it's very freeing almost. You're not tied down to expecting things in return. And a common worry about this is that, oh, if I just start doing things for people, they're just going to abuse me, aren't they? But from my experience, from people I know, I'm not trying to claim I'm a saint, but from my experience, from people that really are almost like this, the people almost feel bad about abusing you and taking you for granted, and they appreciate this love and respect you have for everyone, and that can really change the way they think about things. If you try to practice these respectful traits, you might actually have a positive impact on someone else's personality, help them become more respectful, because you see the genuine help and support and love you can give to someone without trying to get personal gain out of it. And I think that's a very powerful concept, which for those that can implement it, will really help you change your life and feel personally fulfilled, because ultimately that's what life is about. Personal fulfillment, not necessarily in material senses, as I'll talk about later, but spiritually and mentally. So now I want to move on to two last points, both jnana yoga, and this one was quite a big takeaway for me from the Gita. So it was this concept about we all have to do work, whether it's a job, school. We have to do work in this world. And a lot of the times we hear, you're stressed about work, you don't enjoy your work, you don't really want to do it anymore, had enough, let me quit, that kind of thing. And I find this is really sad, when I hear these things, like, because you often, for students that invest a lot of money into university or going to school, a job, working long hours, it's such a shame when you hear that no one, people aren't enjoying it. And so one of the things that the Gita tells us is not necessarily explicitly this, but one thing that I took away is that, you got to try and find things that you love to do and excite you, find something that makes you happy. And most importantly, that you just want to do because of the process of what you're doing, not necessarily because of the results of what you're doing. I feel like our society is geared towards material possessions, wealth, power, things like this. And we do things often, unfortunately, with those things as the goal. And I feel like it's very dangerous to do this when you focus on your results as kind of the primary motivation. It makes you obsessive, it makes you anxious, it makes you stressed. And the reason for this is because when supposedly, let's say you have been working hard in, hoping for a big payday or something, or the top grade, if that doesn't happen, you're plunged into the depths of despair. You don't know what to do. All your work, which you might not even have enjoyed, didn't even pay off, as supposedly, because you didn't get what you wanted. And so, like I said, like it says on the slide, it's even worse if you don't achieve these material goals. It's even worse if you don't even enjoy what you were doing. So for me personally, what I've tried to do from then onwards is to focus on the journey rather than the destination. So what I'm trying to say is, like, what you're doing, the work, whether it be a job or sports or academics, whatever it might be, do those activities for the activities itself, because you enjoy doing that activity, because it makes you happy, not because it's going to make you, or like gym, not because it's going to make you stronger, not because of running because you're going to get a good time, or not because for work because you're going to get a good grade. It's more about work because you enjoy learning about this stuff, or gym because you like the challenge. You want to become stronger for yourself, not because you want to show off to someone. So for me, I think the takeaway from the Gita is about, the process should be the motivation rather than focusing on what's going to happen at the end of this process. You know, that's often just a nice or unpleasant side product. And it's important we don't let the result, you know, change our mood significantly, you know, because if you focus on the process and love the process, it's likely that whether the result is negative or positive, you know, you don't even think about it in that respect. You're not focused about what happens. You're more focused about what you're doing. And the great thing about it is that, from my experience, is when you know you just love what you're doing and you put full effort and passion into it, it's more than likely that you're going to do well in it. And the greatest thing is that's not even important. That's just a pleasant side product. And I know this is easy to say, you know, unfortunately, we have lots of things we have to do, you know, growing up and when you're older. So it's not easy to find what you love very easily. But when you can do that, and moreover, when you can employ this attitude when doing things, it makes everything so much more fulfilling, and you feel happier about what you're doing. And you never, or not never, but you avoid getting stressed and anxious about, you know, this whole concept of results. You know, that's no longer a massive factor. And another thing, this isn't necessarily from the Gita, but it's from a similar type of book called the Upanishads, another spiritual set of scriptures in Hindu culture, is that, you know, we always hear about in Buddhism as well that desire is suffering, that kind of thing. And I think that's kind of a misconception, because desire doesn't necessarily have to be bad. You know, not having desire is almost even worse. You know, if you're just sitting around doing nothing, you have no motivation, that's not necessarily a good thing. What is potentially bad is selfish desire. That can be dangerous because, like I was discussing before about this idea of focusing on results too much, selfish desire is likely to cause you to do that. You know, you lose sight of, you know, what, you know, the enjoyment and love you have for what you're doing, and you become selfish about what you're doing is going to reap, and that starts to become a problem. And the last thing I wanted to talk about on the Jnana Yoga front was this concept of focusing the mind. So this is probably the hardest out of all the things I've talked about so far. So, you know, we grow up, especially in the UK, I don't know if anyone else is anywhere else in the world, but at least in the UK, we grow up with loads of, you know, luxuries and things that are really easy, which has unfortunately caused us to have not the best habits. You know, we've become lazy because we can just lie around all day or just sit and watch TV. We have phones and iPads that unfortunately don't necessarily do very productive things on them. We eat badly, we eat fast food, soft drinks, and we depend heavily on things like hot water, you know, warmth, that kind of thing. And I think, you know, what I noticed I'll explain, you know, when I tried doing some of these things, and I think that everyone actually has so much more potential to do difficult things, you know, like examples I've listed below, you know, cold showers, long runs, difficult swimming, you know, disciplining yourself on diets, you know, meditating and focusing on nothing almost. But the way we've been conditioned and what we're used to, when we're presented with, you know, a set of options, you know, hot shower, cold shower, you know, we're just naturally geared towards, let's just take the easy option, the comfortable option. Why even bother? Why would I have a cold shower? That's just stupid. You know, what benefit? That's almost like what kind of pleasure am I getting out of a cold shower? It's useless, right? But I feel like if we can remove this kind of mental block in our heads that is kind of telling us, no, just don't bother with that difficult option. It's not worth it. It doesn't give us any short-term gain. It's not very nice. It's hard. Don't do it. Just go with the easy option. Go with the comfortable option. You know, you could work a bit more on the essay. No, you know what? Let's watch some Netflix. You know, I feel like if we can kind of understand this mental block we have and respect that it's there in the first place and try and almost remove it, you know, that incremental extra effort in, you know, trying to do something that seems harder or that maybe that may not be so comfortable, we can actually achieve really incredible things that, you know, you would never really think that you could do. And that is more fulfilling, in my opinion, than any of the things I've mentioned before. Like I said, examples like cold showers. So like what I started doing a while ago, what I tried doing is, you know, just try and have the whole shower cold, you know, not, you know, it might seem crazy, like why on earth did I do that? But it's more about being able to just go in there and not let what I'm, you know, feeling on my body, the cold, affect the way I think, like screaming or running out the shower or turning the lever back up. just focusing myself to know that this isn't going to injure me or hurt me. This is not something, I'm not doing anything dangerous. And I can sustain this. It's not something I can't do. If I just, think really carefully about why I want to turn that lever back up to hot, or why I want to run out, it's because you're conditioned to do the easy thing, the comfortable thing. If you just focus yourself, it's easy to say, don't get me wrong, it's unbelievably difficult to do in practice consistently. But if you can start to develop this, removing this mental block in your head, you really can do exceptionally amazing things. And there's actually this movie called a movie based on a book called The Razor's Edge, which is I think it's an analogy from the Upanishads again, that it says that this path to spirituality, doing these difficult things, removing this mental block, can be compared to a razor's edge. It's unbelievably difficult to traverse this path because it's so narrow and it's so sharp that if you fall off, it's unbelievably difficult to climb back on. You almost have to start again. Just think about the example of the cold showers. Let's say for a few days, you're like, you know what, I can't do this anymore. Let me just go back to hot. Going back to cold only, I can tell you from experience, is unbelievably difficult because, it's so much easier. We almost go back into that mindset of, I just want to do the easy thing. I can do the easy thing. Why would I do the difficult thing? But it's about, finding that mental block and slowly removing it from your mind to help you do things that really fulfill you. There's another concept from the Upanishads called Praya and Shreya. So short-term gain versus long-term gain. The short-term gain is always, like I was saying, but it's almost like the easiest, most comfortable option. It's something that we know is going to give us short-term pleasure. Examples like hot shower, smoking, eating fast food. It's going to give us temporary joy for like a half an hour, right? But in the long term, it's really either not going to help us or it's going to be detrimental to our mental health, to our activities, that kind of thing. The prayer, the long-term gain, might involve us doing hard things, eating well, removing fast food and fatty foods or salty foods, eating, healthy, or having these cold showers, or, going for a run every day. Might involve very difficult things that might not seem very pleasant to start with. But again, if you employ this thing about loving your work and changing the attitude of how you approach these things, and you try doing these hard things, you feel so fulfilled further down the line that, yeah, wow, I really did this. And you'll start to, you'll experience, physical health benefits, things like that. And again, it's not necessarily these health benefits that's the important thing. The result is not important. It's more like that we are able to do these difficult things because we can, and it gives us, maybe not in the moment, you might feel, oh, do I really want to do this? Or like, oh, why am I eating this salad? But, a bit further down, it's almost like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. And that was so personally fulfilling. And at the end of the day, all these philosophies are for, mental peace. We're trying to achieve harmony in our heads. The mind is a turbulent place. And if we can employ some of these philosophies to try and help us calm down and achieve personally amazing things, like none of these things are, they're not Nobel Prize winning things or anything, but they're basic things that everyone can try and do that can really change the way you approach life. So I hope you enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much for listening. And I'd love to hear any questions anyone has. And also, if anyone follows any other similar philosophies from any different spiritual texts, please feel free to say so. Thank you very much. Okay, so I've got a question from Adi, if you'd like to turn your mic on. Adi, I can't seem to hear you. Okay, we'll move on to the next question while Adi's fixing his thing. Megana's got a question.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was any point in your own life when you've, I suppose, implemented Jnana Yoga, when you've had to, make a particular change and you've focused yourself, in which like the kind of sacrificing those short-term joys, as you mentioned, has benefited you in the long term. Like, do you have a personal example of that you could share?
Good question. So I think one of them not necessarily is, I haven't necessarily reaped any like benefits as such, but I've been trying to take as much as possible a cold shower every day for about a year and a half now. And it hasn't necessarily, you know, changed me like physically, or like, you know, I haven't seen any benefits in that respect, but it does give me this feeling that when I go in, it's almost like I do still feel like kind of afraid, you know, this is horrible, why am I doing this? But it's almost like when I'm there, you almost get used to it. And it's like, it's that feeling of like, I'm so glad I did this. This is really fulfilling that I'm able to achieve something difficult like this, you know, without, you know, breaking a leg or something. It's almost that personal fulfillment for me is really the power of all these philosophies. So no, I don't, that's my best example. There's nothing I've experienced that's really changed me physically, kind of, if that's what you're asking. Got a question from Najib.
Hi, thank you for that. That was really interesting. I was really interested when you about focusing on the process rather than the outcome. But you mentioned in the context of work, focusing on enjoyment, but that seems like an outcome to me, not a process. So I was a little confused.
Sorry, that seems like a what? Can you say again, please?
So if you focus on enjoyment in work, for example, that still seems like focusing on an outcome, not a process.
Okay, fair enough. But I think my point was more to do with the fact that, you know, the content of what you're doing should be why you do it. You know, I understand that is kind of like a desire, you know, it's like a focusing on a result kind of, but my point is more to look at the activity itself rather than what the activity is going to bring you materially or physically, or, you know, if it's going to, like, if you're focusing on the money or, like, you know, the gains in the gym, for example, or like your stamina kind of thing, when you start focusing on these like almost traits or, you know, rewards, I feel like you lose focus of, you know, the true passion of why you're doing the thing. And when that happens, like I was saying, often people start to just falter. You lose interest, kind of thing. Like, it's not sustainable at all to just focus on what you're trying to achieve. But when you really love what you're doing, like just running because running is so much fun, or running because I just enjoy being in nature and just going off, you know, that's what really where the power is. That's what's going to make you run forever, you know, kind of thing. So I think if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Did Addy, if your thing's working?
Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully I don't cut out, so I'll try and make this quick. That was a great talk, Arjun. I really liked it. I really liked the razor's edge metaphor as well. So I just Googled that actually. Yeah, they're really interesting. I guess I'm just gonna give you like a bit of a strange question. I mean, like a topical one, I guess, for all of us at uni, right? Like, I'm sure you know, like loads of people applying for like back schemes, summer internships, you know, like the like selling outright. When we like observing that, do you maybe think there's a tension between them not doing what they want, but also thinking long term? Because like
no, that's a great question.
Like, entering like the commercial world mean that you can like achieve financial.
So I'm actually really glad you asked this question.
And that's something a lot of people think, right? Yeah, go for it.
I'm really glad you asked this question. I should have actually mentioned this in my talk. So the point about this whole thing about, you know, this, you know, getting into the workspace, getting on the housing ladder, things like this, the Gita is not telling you that you don't need money. Of course you need money to live. You know, unfortunately, it's a basic function of life that you just need money to do things. You know, I'm not trying to tell you should become some ascetic and go into the forest and starve yourself to reach enlightenment, because even the Buddha tells us that that's not the way. You know, when you find these vac schemes, all of that kind of thing, I think what maybe isn't so good is if you're finding a scheme that might not necessarily suit you so well, but might pay better. You know, when that starts to happen, it might seem great, like, oh yeah, I'm going to get a great job, it's going to look great on my CV, you know, parents are going to be happy, I'm going to get loads of money. But again, like I was Najib's question, it's not very sustainable at all. You're probably going to burn out in 6 months, a year, and that's a disaster. So, you know, I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't be worried, like you shouldn't think about money and material wealth. Those things are obviously important. What I'm trying to say is that shouldn't be your motivation for doing things. Those things should just come as a part of what you do already, kind of thing. They should be byproducts. They are just not unfortunately. I think it's natural. You know, we need money to buy things and put a roof over our heads and live and eat. It's more about, I think, finding something that genuinely interests you. In this vac scheme example, something that genuinely interests you and that you think you will really enjoy in the long term, whatever the pay might be. That's not the key, because that, in my opinion, that's not necessarily where fulfillment lies. It's more in what you're doing where the fulfillment lies, if that answers your question. Yeah. Great. Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. Samyak, yeah, we got a question from Samyak.
Hi, Arjun. I was thinking about, like, so we as students, we obviously like to get involved with projects and societies and stuff. And whenever we organize an event, or I guess you can, I mean, I'm looking at it from an event perspective now, but just generally, we always have a goal in mind. And like, we want to get a certain number of people to come on, make a certain amount of profit, etc. And sometimes, like, we get too maybe even attached to our event. Do you think the true karma yoga, as expounded by the Gita, would be if we focus our attentions on how much we've developed in terms of our leadership, how much we've developed in terms of our understanding of each other, our friendships we've made, if we focus on that rather than the actual material gain of what the event is, would that be the real karma yoga?
So again, this is another point I was thinking I should have added to my talk. So I think this whole thing about attachment to, like, like the material, like the kind of statistics of, these events, I think it's not necessarily a bad thing to have, like I said, the desire to do well. It's not a bad thing. I think it becomes a problem when you become obsessed and attached with it, when that is all you can think about. Like, I have to get 100 people to come to this, like, otherwise it's a failure. I think when that mindset starts to kick in, you've lost focus completely. And I think there's even if there are 100 people, you're still going to be anxious about, did they even like it? You start to ask stupid questions in your head that aren't relevant to what the event is about. The event is probably about something great. In this case, it's this Gita talk, or like a Diwali ball to celebrate a lovely festival. So, like, when you start worrying too much about these parameters, you lose focus of what you're actually trying to do. So I think the karma yoga point is about more not getting obsessed and attached to all these factors, appreciating that they're important, but like I said, look, you can't live without money. Like, you can't can't do this event if there aren't people. They're important, don't get me wrong, but they're not the key. Almost, they're part of a much wider picture. I think that's the point. Another question from Najib.
Yeah, sorry for another one.
No worries.
I was just slightly curious, and it's something I was interested in general. A lot of the points you mentioned were a little this worldly, which I don't think is wrong. But I just think it's interesting because I know some people.
Sorry, I missed that.
This worldly, for lack of a better term.
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
As in, kind of immediate circumstances.
Okay.
And I know it has been critiqued in a lot of, like, Christian writings or Islamic writings, of that undermining anything beyond this world. That there's too much of a focus on the here and now, which can neglect anything beyond. I don't really know the answers to that, but I was just really curious for your thoughts.
Yeah, so I mean, like, like focusing on the present is not necessarily, it's a good thing. I mean, you should. In fact, a lot of the times, sometimes not looking too far ahead into the future or out of this world sometimes can be useful, because let me just give you an example. So I think, like, let's say you're running up a hill, for example, right? Naturally, when we see this challenge, it's almost like an immediate demoralizing factor. It's almost like, oh gosh, I can't do this. Like, you have looked into the future because you will be at the top of that hill eventually, but it's kind of like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just going to go slowly because otherwise I'm going to get tired. If you just focus on yourself and the present and just, pretend that hill isn't there, just suppose you're running flat. Obviously you'll feel the hill, but you don't know the hill is there. So it's almost like focusing on the present in that case can help you. You won't let kind of something that might bring you down almost. I don't know if that's what you were asking, but
no, thank you.
Okay, got a question from Shantanu.
Hi, I appreciate the talk. I was just wondering, what would be some first steps you would recommend for someone who wants to put the principles of the Gita in their life? What are some first steps or first things they can do?
It's a great question. So, wow, no, that's a really good question. So I think the best way to start, to be very honest, is to read it. So I think, obviously, I've given you some of the principles, now I think it's best, because as I mentioned in the talk, this isn't necessarily what the Gita is telling you explicitly. This is stuff I've this is stuff I've taken from it almost. So number one, read it for yourself. Try and find some philosophies, adapt them to what you think is right, and then decide how to go about it. So, if it's something like cold showers, go for it. That's something that's difficult, and you can try and do something that you've never tried before almost. So I think it's just about read the Gita, see what it has to say, and also read wider than that. There are lots of spiritual books across many of the religions. Hinduism has one answer. There are lots of different answers out there. So I think if you read it and start to develop your own ideologies of why these philosophies are even interesting, and what you could do about how you could go about developing kind of practical things you can do to change yourself. These are just some things I've done. They're not exhaustive whatsoever. So yeah, that would be my advice. Question from Paras.
Thank you, Arjun. I was just thinking, if, for example, we'd taken in the Gita, we've done the things, then how do we end up sharing this with other people without it seeming as if it's such a daunting thing to tackle in the first place? What I'm kind of trying to ask is, how do we get more people on board and or people who haven't read it to take lessons away from it like we have?
Interesting. That's a really good question. Wow, that's difficult. So I think talking to people about this, like just hosting things like this, can really help. Just raise, just make it aware that these philosophies even exist. Because I think one of the biggest misconceptions about religion is that it's all about prayer and devotion and going to church or going to temple and that kind of thing. If you really dig a bit deeper and find actually read the scriptures and understand the religion itself, it's more spiritual and philosophical than anything. So I think the first step, in my opinion, is to kind of address this misconception of religion being kind of like a group of people that just meet because they share a common theme almost. That's not what it's about. That's a lovely thing. The traditions, the festivities, those are great. But I think the key thing about religion is more the philosophy behind them, the spirituality. So I think if we can kind of expand that out more to people, they'll think of religion in a different way. Because I didn't even know about this. I thought the Gita was just some story about Krishna, telling about you should pray and don't eat this and do that and that kind of instructions almost. But it's not at all. It's more kind of saying, this is what I think can help you live more happily. It's up to you to decide how you do it. Krishna is by no means forcing you to do anything. You can decide, I think this is all complete rubbish. I'm not doing any of this. I think the way I live is perfect, and that's fine. That's fine. It's just that some of these philosophies really can potentially help you become happier and more fulfilled. So yeah, on your point, I think, breaking this misconception of religion, I think is really important. I don't know. Question from Yuvi.
Hi, Arj. Thanks for the talk, first of all.
No worries.
Really illuminating talk. And also, I think my question has to do a bit with the sort of form of the Gita and how it's sort of how the narrative works, because ultimately, and then sort of the impact that has on our understanding of it, because ultimately it's basically a dialogue between sort of God and a hero. The God being Krishna, the hero being Arjun, and ultimately he's the only sort of brother it's told to. He's the only warrior this divine knowledge is shared with, or the spiritual shared with. So I was just wondering, since that's the sort of nature of the disclosure of this information is so exclusive, and since there's only one person receiving this information, as it were, to what extent do you think the Gita is telling us to sort of become Arjun in a way, to sort of morph into, or like attempt to acquire the qualities that Arjun has in order to further sort of access our spiritual sort of fulfillment? And if that is what the Gita is telling us to do indirectly, then what qualities do you think we need to adopt to sort of become Arjun in a way?
So I think, I personally, when I read it the first time, I didn't get this feeling of like, I need to, ignore the fact that we share the same name. That's just a red herring. But I didn't feel like I needed to become this powerful warrior who's like the best archer in the world. So, I mean, I see what you're trying to say. The fact that it's this dialogue just between, Krishna and Arjun. I can see why you might, why it might feel like, yeah, I really need to become this, morph into this perfect person. But personally, the way I understood it was that's not necessarily the important factor. I think Arjun kind of represents us as like humans, because like he is, at the end of the day, he broke down in front of his best friend, telling him like, I have no idea what to do here. I am hopeless. Help me. He kind of represents the wider sense, everyone on earth who is a human, because obviously Krishna is inhuman, he's God. But the point is, Arjun was not perfect. He was not ideal. He had, problems in his head. He didn't know what to do. So I think it's moreover trying to just appreciate that, yes, I am not perfect. I cannot just, assume that everything I do is righteous or correct. It's more developing philosophies for myself to help guide me in the right direction, almost. And I think that's more what Krishna was trying to tell Arjun about, how he should employ some of these things for himself to understand why he's doing what he's doing. In this case, it was the battle. But for us, it's just everyday life, basically, like all the activities we do. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that was really helpful.
Yeah. Okay, Davisha has a question.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. It was really interesting. I just wanted to ask, has this like spiritual and philosophical perspective changed your perception of, or perhaps your connection with God, do you think?
No, that's I'm glad you mentioned God, because obviously this is all spiritual, but remember, this is supposedly truths from God. So I think for me, I know this might be taken as an extremist view. This is my personal view. I'm not trying to say this is right or wrong, but when I read this, I had never read anything that made so much sense, was so sensible and so like true. It just made me feel like there must be a God out there. No mortal could have written this, and if it was a mortal, God was truly inside this mortal. This is too good. This is too amazing, and too like, obviously we can't do this as humans. Like employing all these philosophies is too difficult, but it was just amazing. I'd never read something that incredible. So for me, that after reading that, it kind of made me feel like it's important that I have this, like I talked about in the first slide, faith all the time, because I love God and because God is so amazing. Not because God's going to give me this and God's going to give me that, just because how incredible God's philosophies are, and how like genuine God's love is for us. That's how I approached seeing God after reading the Gita. Yeah. Some more questions. Thomas.
Hi, Jai Shri Krishna. Thanks very much for that amazing talk. That was really, really interesting and yeah, very thought-provoking. I was just wondering if you kind of have a particularly favorite like Vedanta commentator or an acharya whose interpretation of commentary has interested you, or would you prefer to rely upon your own kind of interpretation rather than?
Yeah, no, that's a interesting question. So I mean, see, I'm not personally like super involved in like the details of the Gita, like all the characters and stuff like that. And bear in mind, I read this many years ago, so I remember the basics of the stories, but there are no particular, like I said, acharyas like that struck me, So like, I obviously respect, the whole story about Drona and all of them being, big people in this story. It seriously influenced Arjun in his development. But for me, the focus is more on how what Krishna is telling Arjun changes the way he thinks about what he's doing. That's because obviously he's developed all this knowledge about archery and battle and all that stuff before, but he had never thought about his mind. He had always taken everything so physically. I need to be the best archer. I need to be the best king, that kind of thing. He never thought about how do I do this in a way that's not selfish. And the great thing is Arjun was not a selfish person by nature. So, you know, all these philosophies Krishna told him they really struck him as something that was new almost, but that was something that he could implement. So I think, you know, but yeah, so on your question, no, not particularly anything detailed, but more the philosophy side. Adi has another question.
Could I slip in with him? Sorry. I was actually gonna suggest something along those lines, actually, like a commentator. So I have this right, which is called Vakya Vritti, which was written by Adi Shankara, the founder of like the Vedanta school of Hindu philosophy, and the commentator is Swami Chinmayananda, who's obviously like the Vedanta school, and it's formally quite similar to the Gita, so it employs a dialogic format too. So there's like an eager student and an enlightened teacher, and it's very readable. It's not particularly long. It's less than 100 pages. So I'd recommend that if anyone's interested. And it ties in really well with what you've been discussing. It's obviously very philosophical.
Great, thank you. Anna has a question.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I've really enjoyed it. I was just wondering how after this kind of process of enlightenment you can continue to participate in and engage with a society which indoctrinates us to strive for material wealth and status, and whether a process of like whether you become kind of disillusioned or cynical of our society.
No, that's a very good point. You know, once you've read all these things, you kind of feel like, how do I go about it without changing my friend group, changing people I know? Because, you know, like you said, the way we live is unfortunately geared towards these things. So I think it's not necessarily asking for like a complete 180 kind of like, I need to become, like I was saying, well, you don't need to become like I don't care about money, I don't care about, you know, pleasure, that kind of thing. I personally don't think that's what's the Gita is getting at. I think it's more kind of diving into, you know, these interesting philosophies to change small things at a time, you know. And it's not that you don't have to worry about money, but it's more about finding things that you enjoy. Like, I think I forgot who asked about the back scheme thing, but that was a great I think it was Adi. It's a great example because, like, of course, you know, at the end of the day, you know, you hope you have a great job that looks good and pays well, but if it's not something that you enjoy, there's pointless. Or like, you know, you might want to go to the pub with your friends and just get drunk because you want to. That's not a bad thing, but like, you just need to know that, you know, you should control yourself so you know what you're doing. Don't go crazy kind of thing. As long as you know what you're doing and you understand what you're doing, you're having a good time without being silly. Or that's just one example, but like, you know, if you know what you're doing and, you know, you're passionate about what you do, I think that's the most important thing. Don't worry about the too far into the future. I'm not saying you shouldn't plan, but, you know, when you start going too far ahead, you start getting anxious and stressed, and that's where it all starts to fall apart. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? It looks like the hand raised thing is empty. No, great. I think can hand over back to Shonal to end the talk.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Arjun. I'd like to say on behalf of everyone here, that was an incredible talk. We learned a lot from it, and the Q&A as well. There were some great questions from everyone. So yeah, once again, massive thanks to Arjun for the talk today. Finally, our last event this term with HumSoc is our big quiz this Wednesday with Cambridge and Imperial, called Game On. So watch out on the Facebook. We have the event there where you can sign up. It's 6 p.m. on Wednesday. So definitely go to that if you want to. And that's it.
We also have a Aarti at 7 p.m. in collaboration with Cambridge, which is a weekly thing we do. And I'd really recommend you guys to just turn up, and you can just listen to it. You don't have to really do anything. I personally think it's quite therapeutic and just a nice way to end the week. So maybe hop onto that if you're interested. That's all.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.